Here we have a Hameg HM203 20 megahertz bandwidth scope from about 1982. The scope has a nice layout and all the controls seem to work except for one, the focus control. Both those traces, those blurred traces that you see in the screen, should be very sharp. So I'm going to have to look into the schematic diagram and see what is causing that. Here we see the schematic diagram of the CRT circuit. On the far left, the pen is pointing to VR700, which is a 470K resistor. It's a potentiometer, and that is connected to the focus electrode on the CRT 700. I suspect that the voltage on the VR700 wiper is too high. Now you can look at the circuit surrounding components and you can see that C701 is across three resistors, which is VR700, VR703, and VR702. So I'm going to check that capacitor first. But first I'm going to verify what the voltage is on the focus electrode. Here we are at the back of the oscilloscope. You can see quite plainly the back of the CRT, and the red alligator clip is connected to pin 8 and the yellow one is connected to the chassis. We're going to monitor the voltage across those two terminals and see if we can change the voltage by adjusting the potentiometer. Here we're monitoring the voltage on pin 8, the focus grid of the CRT, and it's just like I suspected. It's about 1800 volts. So that shows that that's the problem, but we have to trace down and find out what's causing that problem. My first suspicion is that it's the capacitor that I earlier pointed to that's across those three resistors. Now I'm just going to demonstrate that what happens when I turn the focus grid, it doesn't do anything. Go from one end, go to the other. Focus potentiometer doesn't do anything. So we're going to look at that capacitor. Best way is probably to take it out and test it. I checked the number of components around the focus control. R703, the R700, which is the focus control itself, R702, R701, R700, C700, and C701, and they all seem to be okay. So from that point, I'm going to proceed to the power supply and check the voltages that are coming in and see if they're according to specs. Something weird happened. I was doing voltage checks around here and here. These two resistors, this one and this one, which are on the schematic, they are R701 and R700. And I guess moving one of them, there must have been a cold solder joint, and the unit sprang to life. The focus control started working. So what I'm going to have to do is resolder the where those resistors go to the lands on the circuit board, and that's probably the fix. Now that the oscilloscope's working, I can vary the voltage, and it's much more within the specs of what it's supposed to be. Here are my voltages that I'm measuring on the pin 8 of the CRT. The maximum voltage is 1500 volts, and the lowest one is 1350. It's a little different from what it says in the book. In the book it says minus 1476 to 1621 volts, but that doesn't matter because it works properly. It's the display is working properly. And this is showing the oscilloscope doing what it's supposed to be doing. There's the intensity control, and there's the sharpness, the focus control. Here. It's triggering on itself. There's a little more intensity, a little more sharpness there. And it's just working pretty well the way it's supposed to. I resoldered all the connections that I suspected were faulty, especially around those resistors. I just redid about 20 of the connections with new solder, and I took and put in some lubricant in a lot of the controls just to make sure that there were no dirty connections, and I loosened up that focus control. It was quite stiff. Now I've inspected a lot of the capacitors on the board, and I don't see any that look like they are about to stop working. They don't look like they're leaking. I don't see any signs of leaking, which shows that they were very good quality capacitors that were used. If they're still good by 2022, and this is 40 years old, I don't see any signs of leaking. Still look pretty good. Those are your filter capacitors there. Those are your various voltage power supplies. And I don't see any signs of anything looking burnt. Everything looks really good in this oscilloscope. I'll summarize what we did in this repair. So what I first found when I turned it on was that the focus control would not work. And the actual trace was very blurry, and didn't matter how you turned it, it wouldn't adjust. So I measured the voltage on here, and it was 1800 volts. So I suspected that maybe some of the resistors or capacitors were not working, were bad. So I checked every single one of these components, and I also checked all the components here, even though the intensity control worked fine. So this high voltage here seemed to be excessively high. It should be variable between 1400 to 1600 volts. And this voltage here was correct. So I was wondering, checking various voltages here, and then I found that when I was checking the voltage drops across these resistors, all of a sudden it started working. So this being ground, there should be voltage drops all up here, and by the time it gets here, there's 1900 volts across here, so all these resistors drop. So when it gets to here, it should be 1400 to 1650 or whatever I said, variable. So this voltage here was almost the same as this voltage, a slight drop through that resistor. So that means that there's a slight current flowing through here to the grid, and that was causing the voltage drop across here. But it would not give a proper adjustment for the focus. So when I was checking these voltages here, all of a sudden it started working. So I realized it must be a cold solder joint between one of these resistors. So I resoldered both the connections. I resoldered the connections all around here just to be on the safe side, and worked perfectly. So I cleaned out some of the controls, especially the trigger, which is filthy. I put some spray cleaner into it, and I also put some spray cleaner into the focus control because it was kind of stiff. And now it seems to work really well. A nice bright adjustable display, and I'll just show the display. I have a 1 kilohertz internally generated voltage right here. This is a 1 kilohertz 0.2 volt, I believe it's peak to peak, and I'm showing that on there. And the focus control works very well. You can get it right there. If you want to increase it, you can get it right really sharp. So everything seems to be working very well. So this repair is done.